Sergeant Amanda Lewis clutched her boarding pass, her tired eyes scanning the bustling airport terminal. After 6 grueling months in Iraq, she was finally heading home. The weight of her experiences hung heavy on her shoulders, but a small smile tugged at her lips as she thought of seeing her family again. "Now boarding first class for Flight 149 to Denver," the announcement crackled over the speakers. Amanda blinked in surprise. First class? She double-checked her ticket, confirming that yes, she indeed had a first-class seat. It must have been a mix-up or an upgrade, but she wasn't about to question her luck. As she made her way down the jet bridge, Amanda's military-issued boots echoed against the walls. She stepped onto the plane, the familiar smell of recycled air filling her nostrils. The first-class cabin gleamed with polished surfaces and plush seats. "Welcome aboard, ma'am," the flight attendant greeted her warmly. "Your seat is 1B, just to your left." Amanda nodded her thanks and moved to her assigned seat. She stowed her small backpack in the overhead compartment and sank into the comfortable chair, relishing the extra legroom. It was a far cry from the cramped military transports she'd grown accustomed to. As other passengers filed in, Amanda closed her eyes, allowing herself a moment of peace. The soft murmur of conversations and the rustle of bags being stowed filled the cabin. "Excuse me?" A sharp voice cut through her moment of tranquility. "I believe you're in my seat." Amanda's eyes snapped open. A well-dressed man in his 50s stood in the aisle, his lips pursed in a thin line of disapproval. His gaze raked over her uniform, pausing at the sergeant's stripes on her sleeve. "I'm sorry, sir, but this is my assigned seat," Amanda replied, keeping her voice steady and professional. She reached for her boarding pass to double-check. The man's frown deepened. "There must be some mistake. This is first class." The implication in his tone was clear, and Amanda felt a familiar knot form in her stomach. She'd faced this kind of prejudice before, but it never got easier. "I'm aware of that, sir," she said, handing him her boarding pass. "As you can see, I've been assigned seat 1B. The man snatched the ticket from her hand, scrutinizing it with narrowed eyes. A flight attendant approached, her practiced smile unwavering. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, looking between Amanda and the man. "Yes, there certainly is," the man replied, his voice rising. "This person claims to have a first-class ticket. Surely there's been some sort of mix-up." The flight attendant glanced at Amanda's boarding pass. "Everything appears to be in order, sir. Sergeant Lewis is indeed assigned to seat 1B. The man's face flushed red. "This is unacceptable. I paid good money for a first-class ticket, and I won't have my flight ruined by—" "Sir," the flight attendant cut in firmly, "I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voice. Sergeant Lewis has a valid first-class ticket, and she has every right to be here. Now, if you'll please find your seat, we need to prepare for takeoff." The man huffed, shooting Amanda a final glare before stomping off to his own seat. Amanda took a deep breath, willing her racing heart to slow. She could feel the eyes of other passengers on her, a mix of curiosity and discomfort. The flight attendant turned to Amanda, her expression softening. "I'm so sorry about that, Sergeant. Can I get you anything before we take off?" Amanda shook her head. "No, thank you. I'm fine." As the plane taxied to the runway, Amanda stared out the window, her mind replaying the confrontation. She'd faced danger and death in Iraq, yet somehow this encounter left her feeling more shaken than any firefight. The engines roared to life, and the plane lifted into the air. Amanda watched as the ground fell away, the patchwork of city streets giving way to a sea of clouds. She thought about home, about her family waiting for her, and about the man who had questioned her right to be sitting where she was. As the seatbelt sign dinged off, Amanda reached for her backpack. She pulled out a small notebook and a pen, an idea forming in her mind. Maybe there was a way to turn this ugly situation into something positive. She began to write, her pen moving swiftly across the page. "Dear Sir," she started, then paused, considering her words carefully. This wasn't about anger or retribution. It was about understanding. As Amanda wrote, she didn't notice the man from earlier watching her from across the aisle, his expression a mix of shame and curiosity. The flight attendant approached Amanda's seat, a gentle smile on her face. "Sergeant Lewis," she said softly, "I couldn't help but notice you're writing something. May I ask what it is?" Amanda looked up, surprised by the interruption. She hesitated for a moment before responding. It's a letter to the gentleman who questioned my seat earlier." The flight attendant's eyebrows raised in surprise. "A letter? That's certainly unexpected. May I ask why?" Amanda glanced down at her notebook, then back up at the flight attendant. "I believe there's always room for understanding, even in difficult situations. I thought maybe if I shared a bit of my story, it might help bridge the gap." The flight attendant's eyes widened with interest. "That's incredibly thoughtful of you, Sergeant. Would you mind sharing a bit of what you've written?" Amanda hesitated, then nodded. "Well, I've started by explaining who I am and why I'm on this flight. I thought it might help him understand." As Amanda began to read from her letter, the plane hit a patch of turbulence. The fasten seatbelt sign flashed on, and the flight attendant quickly excused herself to check on other passengers. Amanda tucked her notebook away, promising herself she'd finish the letter once things settled down. The turbulence intensified, causing the plane to shudder and shake. Passengers gripped their armrests, worried murmurs filling the cabin. Amanda remained calm, her military training kicking in. She noticed an elderly woman across the aisle looking particularly distressed. "It's okay, ma'am," Amanda said reassuringly. "Turbulence is normal. Just take deep breaths." The woman nodded gratefully, her knuckles white as she clutched her seat. Amanda continued to offer quiet words of comfort, not just to the woman, but to those around her who seemed anxious. As the plane steadied, Amanda caught the eye of the man who had confronted her earlier. He was watching her with a mixture of surprise and grudging respect. She offered him a small nod before turning back to her notebook. Amanda resumed writing her letter, pouring her thoughts onto the page. She wrote about her experiences in Iraq, the camaraderie she'd found with fellow soldiers of all backgrounds, and the lessons she'd learned about humanity in the face of adversity. As she wrote, memories flooded back. She remembered her first day of basic training, standing in line with men and women from all walks of life, all united by their desire to serve. She thought of her best friend Vanessa, a Latina woman from California who'd saved Amanda's life during an ambush outside Baghdad. Amanda's pen paused as she considered how to convey these experiences. She wanted to help the man understand that the uniform she wore represented not just her own service, but the sacrifices of countless others who came from every corner of America. Lost in thought, Amanda didn't notice the flight attendant approaching with the drink cart until she spoke. "Would you like anything to drink, Sergeant?" Amanda looked up, blinking as she pulled herself back to the present. "Oh, just water, please." As the flight attendant poured her drink, she glanced at Amanda's notebook. "Still working on that letter?" Amanda nodded. "Yes, I am. It's turning out to be more challenging than I expected." The flight attendant smiled sympathetically. "Sometimes, the most important things are the hardest to put into words, but I'm sure your sincerity will come through." As she moved on to the next passenger, Amanda sipped her water and returned to her writing. She described the pride she felt in wearing her uniform, not just for herself, but for all those who had come before her and broken barriers. Time seemed to fly by as Amanda poured her heart onto the page. Before she knew it, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing their descent into Denver. Amanda finished her letter with a simple invitation for dialogue and understanding. She signed her name at the bottom, then carefully folded the pages and slipped them into an envelope she'd gotten from the flight attendant. As the plane began its descent, Amanda felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to find the elderly woman she'd comforted during the turbulence smiling at her. "I just wanted to thank you," the woman said warmly. "Your kindness meant a lot to me. Are you heading home?" Amanda nodded, returning the smile. "Yes, I am. After 6 months away, I can't wait to see my family." The woman's eyes softened. "Well, I'm sure they'll be overjoyed to have you back. Thank you for your service, dear." As they continued to chat, Amanda noticed the man who had confronted her earlier watching their interaction, his expression unreadable. But there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before, a glimmer of curiosity, perhaps even remorse. The plane touched down smoothly, taxiing to the gate. As passengers began to gather their belongings, Amanda took a deep breath and stood up. She clutched the envelope containing her letter, gathering her courage. She approached the man's seat just as he was pulling his carry-on from the overhead bin. He tensed as he saw her, weariness evident in his posture. "Excuse me, sir," Amanda said, her voice steady. "I wanted to give you this." She held out the envelope. The man hesitated, confusion replacing his initial defensiveness. "What is it?" he asked gruffly. "It's a letter," Amanda explained. "I thought it might help explain some things. You don't have to read it now, but I hope you will when you have a moment." The man stared at the envelope for a long moment before slowly reaching out to take it. Thank you," he said, his voice gruff but lacking its earlier hostility. As passengers began to file off the plane, the man cleared his throat. "Sergeant," he began, his voice low. "I think I owe you an apology." Amanda raised an eyebrow, surprised by the unexpected turn of events. "Sir?" The man shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. "My behavior earlier was unacceptable. I made assumptions that I shouldn't have." Amanda nodded, acknowledging his words. "Thank you for saying that. It takes courage to admit when we've made a mistake." The man finally met her gaze, a hint of respect in his eyes. "I have a lot to learn, it seems. I lost my brother in Iraq 2 years ago. He was a soldier too." The revelation hung in the air between them, a shared understanding of loss and sacrifice bridging the gap that had seemed so wide just hours before. As they moved towards the exit, the man turned to Amanda one last time. "Sergeant Lewis," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Welcome home." Amanda felt a lump form in her throat as she stepped off the plane and into the bustling terminal. The encounter had left her with a mix of emotions: hope, sadness, and a renewed sense of purpose. As she made her way through the airport, Amanda couldn't help but reflect on the unexpected turns of events. She had boarded the plane expecting a quiet trip home, and instead found herself in the middle of a profound human interaction. Lost in thought, she almost missed the sound of running footsteps behind her. A voice called out, slightly out of breath, "Sergeant Lewis, wait!" Amanda turned, surprised to see the man from the plane hurrying towards her, his carry-on bag bouncing awkwardly at his side. "I'm glad I caught you," he said as he reached her. I read your letter." Amanda's eyebrows rose in surprise. "You read it already? I didn't expect—" The man nodded, his expression a mix of emotions. "I couldn't wait. Your words, they really got to me. I realize now how narrow-minded I've been." Amanda studied his face, seeing genuine remorse in his eyes. "I appreciate you telling me that. It's not easy to confront our own biases." "No, it's not," he agreed, running a hand through his graying hair. "But it's necessary. Your letter made me see things from a different perspective. I'd like to buy you a coffee, if you have time. I have some questions, if you're willing to talk." Amanda hesitated, glancing at her watch. Her family wouldn't be at the airport for another hour due to Denver traffic. After a moment's consideration, she nodded. "All right, I have some time." They made their way to a small coffee shop in the terminal, the buzz of travelers rushing past creating a backdrop of white noise. As they settled into a small table with their drinks, the man extended his hand. I'm Alan, by the way. Alan Johnson. I never properly introduced myself on the plane." Amanda shook his hand firmly. "Sergeant Amanda Lewis? It's nice to meet you, Alan." An awkward silence settled between them as they sipped their coffee. Alan seemed to be gathering his thoughts, his fingers tapping nervously on the table. Finally, he spoke. "In your letter, you mentioned your experiences in Iraq. My brother James. He was stationed there too. He didn't make it home. Amanda's expression softened. I'm so sorry for your loss, Alan. Losing a fellow soldier is hard enough. I can't imagine losing a brother. Alan nodded, his eyes distant. It's been 2 years, but some days it feels like yesterday. When I saw you on the plane, I guess I was angry. Angry that you made it back when James didn't. That's understandable, Amanda said gently. Grief can make us react in ways we normally wouldn't. But that's no excuse for how I treated you, Alan insisted. Your letter, it made me realize how much James would have disapproved of my behavior. He always believed in equality, in judging people by their actions, not their appearance. As Alan spoke, Amanda could see the pain and regret etched on his face. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, worn photograph. This is my unit in Iraq, she said, sliding the picture across the table. Alan picked it up, his eyes scanning the faces of the soldiers. Men and women of various races and backgrounds stood together, arms around each other's shoulders. Dusty and tired, but smiling. The woman next to me is Vanessa, Amanda explained. She saved my life during an ambush. The guy on the end is Ahmed, our interpreter. He risked everything to help us. We came from different worlds, but out there, none of that mattered. We were family. Alan traced the faces in the photo with his finger, his expression thoughtful. James used to say something similar in his letters home. I guess I never really understood. Until now. As they continued to talk, Amanda shared more stories from her deployment. She told Alan about the local children they'd helped, the schools they'd protected, and the bonds formed with fellow soldiers. With each story, she could see Alan's perspective shifting, his preconceived notions crumbling. You know, Alan said after a while, I've spent the last 2 years angry at the world, blaming everyone for James's death. But listening to you, I think I've been dishonoring his memory. Amanda leaned forward, her voice earnest. Your brother gave his life serving his country. The best way to honor him is to live by the values he fought for: equality, justice, compassion. Alan nodded, wiping at his eyes. You're right. James would want me to do better, to be better. As their conversation drew to a close, Alan reached into his briefcase and pulled out a business card. I run a veteran support group, he explained, handing it to Amanda. We focus on helping soldiers readjust to civilian life. I'd be honored if you'd consider joining us sometime. Amanda took the card, a smile spreading across her face. I'd like that, Alan. Thank you. As they stood to leave, Alan hesitated, then pulled Amanda into a brief hug. Thank you for your service, Sergeant Lewis, and thank you for opening my eyes today. Amanda returned the hug, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. What had started as an unpleasant confrontation had transformed into a moment of genuine human connection. As they parted ways, Amanda couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. If this conversation could bridge the gap between her and Alan, perhaps there was hope for healing the larger divides in society. She made her way to the baggage claim area, her mind still processing the events of the day. As she waited for her duffel bag to appear on the carousel, she noticed a young girl watching her with wide eyes. The girl, no more than 7 or 8, tugged on her mother's sleeve and pointed at Amanda. Mommy, look, she's a soldier. The mother smiled apologetically at Amanda. I'm sorry, she's just excited. She wants to be a soldier when she grows up. Amanda knelt down to the girl's level, her heart warming at the child's enthusiasm. Is that so? Well, it's a big job, but I bet you'd be great at it. The girl beamed, her eyes shining. Did you fight bad guys? Were you scared? Amanda chuckled softly. Sometimes I was scared, yes. But being brave doesn't mean you're never afraid. It means doing what's right, even when you are afraid. The girl nodded solemnly, absorbing Amanda's words. Her mother watched the interaction with a mixture of gratitude and admiration. Thank you for your service, the mother said softly. And thank you for taking the time to talk to her. It means a lot. Amanda stood, offering a warm smile. It's my pleasure. Your daughter reminds me why I do what I do. As the family moved away, Amanda spotted her duffel bag on the carousel. She hefted it onto her shoulder, the familiar weight comforting after the emotional roller coaster of the day. She made her way towards the exit, her heart lightening with each step. Home was just beyond those doors. Her family, her own bed, the life she'd put on hold for 6 months. It was all waiting for her. As she pushed through the sliding doors into the warm Denver afternoon, Amanda took a deep breath. The air smelled different here, like home, like freedom, like possibility. She scanned the crowd of waiting people, searching for familiar faces, and then she saw them. Her parents, her little brother, all holding a giant welcome home sign decorated with American flags. Amanda felt tears prick at her eyes as she quickened her pace. Her mother was the first to spot her, letting out a joyful cry and rushing forward. In moments, Amanda was enveloped in a group hug, surrounded by the love and warmth of her family. As they embraced, Amanda felt the last of her tension melt away. She was home. She was safe. And despite the challenges she'd faced, both on the battlefield and on the plane, she knew that compassion and understanding could bridge even the widest gaps. Her father pulled back, his eyes shining with pride. "Welcome home, sweetheart. We've missed you so much." Amanda smiled, her heart full. "I've missed you too, Dad, more than you know." As they walked to the car, her family peppered her with questions about her flight and her service. Amanda found herself hesitating, unsure how to explain the unexpected encounter with Alan. Her mother, ever perceptive, noticed her hesitation. "Is everything okay, honey? Did something happen on the flight?" Amanda took a deep breath, considering her words carefully. "Actually, Mom, something did happen. Something unexpected." Her mother furrowed her brow, concern etching her features. "What do you mean, honey? Was there trouble on the plane?" Amanda shook her head, a small smile playing on her lips. "No, not trouble exactly. It's a bit of a long story." Her father chimed in, his arm around her shoulders. "We've got plenty of time, sweetheart. Why don't you tell us about it on the drive home?" As they piled into the family car, Amanda in the back seat with her younger brother, she began to recount the events of the flight. Her family listened intently, their expressions shifting from concern to surprise to pride as she described her encounter with Alan and the letter she'd written. "Oh, Amanda," her mother said, twisting in her seat to look at her daughter. "I'm so proud of how you handled that situation. It couldn't have been easy." Amanda shrugged, feeling a mix of emotions. "It wasn't, at first. But then I remembered something my commanding officer used to say. The greatest victories are won not on the battlefield, but in the hearts and minds of people." Her younger brother, Ryan, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke up. "So, did you punch the guy?" "Ryan," their mother admonished, but Amanda just laughed. "No, little bro, I didn't punch him. Sometimes words are more powerful than fists." As they drove through the familiar streets of their hometown, Amanda found herself seeing everything with new eyes. The local diner where she'd spent countless hours with high school friends, the park where she'd learned to ride a bike, the recruitment office where she'd first signed up for the military. All of it seemed both comfortingly familiar and strangely new. "We've kept your room just as you left it," her father said, glancing at her in the rearview mirror, "though your mother might have dusted a bit." Amanda smiled, grateful for the normalcy of it all. After months of military precision and the intensity of deployment, the thought of her childhood bedroom was incredibly appealing. As they pulled into the driveway of their modest 2-story home, Amanda felt a lump form in her throat. A banner hung from the porch, reading, "Welcome home, Sergeant Lewis." Balloons in red, white, and blue bobbed gently in the breeze. "Surprise?" her family chorused as they got out of the car. Amanda blinked back tears, overwhelmed by the love and support surrounding her. As she walked up the familiar path to the front door, memories flooded back. Running down this same path as a child, leaving for basic training with a mix of excitement and fear, the tearful goodbyes before each deployment. Inside, the house smelled of home-cooked food and the faint scent of her mother's favorite candles. Amanda dropped her duffel bag by the door and took a deep breath, letting the familiarity wash over her. "Are you hungry, honey?" her mother asked, already heading towards the kitchen. "I've made all your favorites." Amanda's stomach growled in response, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since the meager airplane meal. "Starving," she admitted with a grin. As they settled around the dining room table, heaping plates of comfort food before them, Amanda felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in months. The simple act of sharing a meal with her family, something she'd dreamed about during long nights in Iraq, felt almost surreal. Between bites of her mother's famous pot roast, Amanda found herself sharing more stories from her deployment. She told them about the friends she'd made, the challenges she'd faced, and the moments of unexpected beauty she'd encountered in a war-torn land. Her family listened attentively, asking questions and offering words of support. Even Ryan, usually more interested in his video games than family conversations, seemed captivated by his sister's tales. As the meal wound down, Amanda's father cleared his throat, his expression turning serious. "Amanda, honey, there's something we need to talk about." Amanda felt a flicker of concern. "What is it, Dad?" He exchanged a glance with her mother before continuing. "Well, you remember Mr. Harper from down the street? He owns that security firm?" Amanda nodded, unsure where this was going. "He approached us a few weeks ago," her father continued. "He's looking to hire veterans for his company, and he asked about you specifically, said he'd be honored to have you on his team." Amanda blinked, surprised. "But I just got home, and I haven't even decided if I'm going to re-enlist or not." Her mother reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "We know, honey. We're not trying to pressure you. We just wanted you to know that there are opportunities here if you decide you want to come home for good." Amanda nodded slowly, her mind whirling with possibilities. The thought of a stable job close to home was tempting, but so was the idea of continuing her military career. She'd worked hard to reach the rank of sergeant, and there was still so much she felt she could contribute. "Thanks for telling me," she said finally. "I'll definitely think about it." As they cleared the table and moved to the living room, Amanda found herself lost in thought. The events of the day, from the confrontation with Alan to this unexpected job offer, had left her with a lot to process. She excused herself and stepped out onto the back porch, needing a moment alone. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. Amanda leaned against the railing, letting the quiet of the evening wash over her. After a few minutes, she heard the screen door open behind her. Her mother stepped out, wrapping a warm sweater around Amanda's shoulders. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked softly. Amanda smiled, grateful for her mother's intuition. "Just thinking about everything. It's a lot to take in." Her mother nodded, standing beside her and looking out at the sunset. "I can only imagine. You've been through so much, seen things we can't even begin to understand." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment before her mother spoke again. "You know, when you first told us you were joining the military, I was terrified. I didn't want my little girl in harm's way." Amanda turned to look at her mother, seeing the mix of pride and worry in her eyes. "But watching you today," her mother continued, "hearing about how you handled that situation on the plane, I realized something. You're not just my little girl anymore. You're a strong, compassionate woman who's making a real difference in the world." Amanda felt tears welling up in her eyes. She wrapped her arms around her mother, holding her tight. "Thanks, Mom. That means more than you know." As they embraced, Amanda felt a sense of clarity begin to settle over her. The path ahead might not be clear yet, but she knew she had the strength and support to face whatever challenges came her way. The screen door creaked open again, and Ryan poked his head out. "Hey, sis, there's someone here to see you." Amanda and her mother exchanged curious glances before heading back inside. As they entered the living room, Amanda stopped short, surprise etched on her face. Standing in the entryway, looking slightly uncomfortable but determined, was Alan. "I hope you don't mind," he said, his voice hesitant. "I found your address on the envelope you gave me. I wanted to talk to you again, if that's okay." Amanda's family looked between her and Alan, confusion evident on their faces. Amanda took a deep breath, realizing that this unexpected visit might be the perfect opportunity to bridge two important parts of her life. "Everyone," she said, her voice steady, "this is Alan. We met on the plane today, and I think we both have a story to share." Tension filled the room as Amanda's family regarded Alan with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. Her father stepped forward, extending his hand. "Welcome to our home, Alan. I'm Paul, Amanda's father." Alan shook his hand firmly. "Thank you for having me, sir. I apologize for the intrusion." Amanda's mother, ever the gracious host, quickly ushered everyone to sit down. "Can I get you something to drink, Alan? Coffee? Tea?" "Just water, please," Alan replied, his eyes never leaving Amanda. As her mother bustled off to the kitchen, Amanda took a deep breath. "I guess I should explain," she began, looking at her family. "Alan and I had a difficult start on the plane, but something important happened, and I think it's worth sharing." Over the next hour, Amanda and Alan took turns recounting the events of their flight. They spoke of the initial confrontation, the letter Amanda had written, and the transformation that had occurred. Alan, his voice thick with emotion, shared about his brother James and how Amanda's words had forced him to confront his own biases. Amanda's family listened intently, their expressions shifting from shock to understanding to admiration. When Alan finished speaking, there was a moment of profound silence. Ryan, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, was the first to break it. "So, you were a jerk to my sister, but now you're not?" "Ryan," Amanda's mother admonished, but Alan held up a hand. "No, he's right," Alan said, a rueful smile on his face. "I was a jerk. Worse than that, really. But your sister, she showed me a better way." Paul leaned forward, his eyes serious. "What you did initially was wrong, Alan, but coming here, admitting your mistakes, that takes courage." Alan nodded, gratitude evident in his eyes. "Thank you, sir. I'm trying to do better, to be better. Amanda's letter, it made me realize how much damage my anger was causing, not just to others, but to myself." Amanda's mother, who had returned with drinks, spoke up. Amanda has always had a gift for bringing out the best in people. Even as a child, she was the peacemaker among her friends. Amanda felt a blush creep up her cheeks. "Mom?" "It's true," her father chimed in. "Remember when you convinced the Thompson kids to stop bullying that new boy at school? You organized a whole welcome committee for him." As her family shared more stories, Amanda felt a warmth spread through her chest. She'd been so focused on her experiences in the military that she'd almost forgotten the person she'd been before, the girl who always stood up for the underdog, who believed in the power of kindness to change hearts. Alan listened to these stories with rapt attention, occasionally glancing at Amanda with a mix of admiration and regret. When there was a lull in the conversation, he cleared his throat. "I can't change what I did on that plane," he said, his voice low but firm. "But I can change what I do going forward. Amanda, I meant what I said about the veteran support group. We'd be honored to have you join us, to share your experiences and insights." Amanda nodded thoughtfully. "I'd like that, Alan. Thank you." As the evening wore on, the initial tension in the room gradually dissipated. Alan shared more about his brother James, telling stories that had the whole family laughing and crying in turn. Amanda found herself seeing Alan in a new light, not just as the man who had confronted her on the plane, but as a grieving brother trying to find his way back to the light. When Alan finally stood to leave, the atmosphere in the room had transformed. Paul shook his hand warmly, and even Ryan gave him a grudging nod of approval. At the door, Alan turned to Amanda one last time. "Thank you," he said simply. For everything. Amanda smiled, feeling a sense of closure. Take care, Alan. I'll see you at the support group. As the door closed behind him, Amanda's family gathered around her. Her mother pulled her into a tight hug. Oh, honey, I'm so proud of you. Her father nodded in agreement. You handled that situation with grace and wisdom beyond your years. Amanda felt tears prick at her eyes, overwhelmed by the love and support surrounding her. I just did what felt right, she said softly. Ryan punched her arm lightly. You're pretty cool for a big sister, he admitted grudgingly. Amanda laughed, ruffling his hair. Thanks, Squirt. As the family settled back into the living room, a comfortable silence fell over them. Amanda found herself reflecting on the whirlwind of events that had brought her to this moment. From the battlefields of Iraq, to a confrontation on a plane, to this quiet evening with her family. It all seemed connected somehow, part of a larger journey. Her mother's voice broke through her thoughts. So, Amanda, what are you thinking about that job offer? Amanda took a deep breath, considering her words carefully. I'm not sure yet, she admitted. Part of me wants to stay here, to be close to you all, but another part feels called to continue serving. Her father finished for her, understanding in his eyes. Amanda nodded. Exactly. After everything that happened today, I feel like there's still so much work to be done, so many bridges to be built. Her mother reached out, squeezing her hand. Whatever you decide, we'll support you. You know that, right? I do, Amanda said, feeling a surge of gratitude, and that means everything to me. As the conversation drifted to lighter topics, Amanda found herself thinking about the future. The path ahead wasn't clear, but she felt a sense of purpose that hadn't been there before. Whether she chose to re-enlist, take the job with Mr. Harper, or pursue something entirely different, she knew that her experiences, both on and off the battlefield, had equipped her to make a difference. Later that night, as Amanda lay in her childhood bed, surrounded by the familiar sights and sounds of home, she felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. The day had been full of unexpected challenges and profound revelations, but through it all, she'd remained true to herself and her values. As she drifted off to sleep, Amanda's last thoughts were of the letter she'd written to Alan. Those words, born from a place of hurt and hope, had sparked a transformation she never could have anticipated. It was a powerful reminder that even in the face of prejudice and misunderstanding, compassion and courage could pave the way for change. In the quiet of the night, with the weight of her experiences settling around her like a familiar blanket, Amanda Lewis, sergeant in the United States Army, daughter, sister, and bridge builder, smiled. Tomorrow was a new day, full of possibilities and potential, and she was ready to face it head on.